Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you all for being here and welcome to the Millyard Museum. My name is Jeff Barraclough. I'm the Executive Director of the Manchester Historic Association that operates the Millyard Museum, and we are so thrilled to have such a great turnout for this program showing the lost films of Amoskeag. I'm sure you will all enjoy this program, and in a moment we'll be introducing the program and what initiated and how we found these films. Before I do that, I just want to make an announcement of a few upcoming events and a little bit about who we are as an organization. If you're not familiar with the Manchester Historic Association, we were founded in 1896, and we are basically the city's historical organization that collects, preserves, and shares Manchester's history. We are a nonprofit organization, and we do not receive any state, local funding. We rely on the support of our members and community support. So if you are a member of the MHA, we thank you for your support. And if you are not, we would encourage you to find out more. And if you would like to learn more, you can speak to me afterwards, speak to Ed, or there's information at the front desk. A couple upcoming events that we have. On March 14th, a couple Saturdays from now, we're doing a program called Undressing History that will be looking at the history of women's clothing that women wore who worked in the mills. It's going to be here at the museum on March 14th, and we'll be learning firsthand about the clothing, life, and struggles of the Amoskeag mill girls. And then we have our annual Historic Preservation Awards event coming up on May 21st. That's held at the Manchester Community College. And it's a great event where we recognize 5 individuals or businesses that have contributed to historic preservation in the Manchester community. And so we're excited to be honoring those. We also this year have a special award that we're going to be doing, which is the People's Choice Award. And we are encouraging the community to vote for their favorite historic place in Manchester. If you have not voted, today is the last day that we're accepting ballots, and there are ballots up at the table near the front. So if you're interested, please take a ballot and fill out your name and who you would like to nominate for your favorite historic place. We'll then be taking the 16 entries that get the most votes. And over the next month, starting next Sunday, we'll be doing a bracket competition and get down to what would be the People's Choice. So that will be throughout the month of March, starting next Sunday. So we'll be looking for social media, posting our newsletter, and anyone is welcome to participate in that through our social media. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Ed Bruder. Ed Bruder is a past president of the Manchester Historic Association, and he is also a wonderful volunteer that works at our research center on Amherst Street on Wednesdays and Saturdays. As people come in to do research, he helps them find information that they're looking for. And it really is, I want to give credit to Ed for putting this program together, for finding these films and contributing to getting them digitized so that we could once again see them and show them today. So this program this morning is really his brainchild, and we're really fortunate to have Ed volunteer and do so much work for us. And it is my pleasure to introduce Ed Bruder.
Thank you, Jeff. Once again, we have some free popcorn up on the tables, and you're welcome to go up there because part of what you're going to see today is silent films. So the first part of this is black and white, and you won't need to be hearing anything, so feel free to wander. You might lose your chair, but enjoy the popcorn. Why are we here today? How did this happen? How did we come about? Well, back in July of last year, we got an email over at the Research Center from a filmmaker who lives in upstate New York. He was from New Hampshire originally. And he graduated from Boston University Film School in 1967 or 8, I'm not sure which. And he said, way back in 1968, my brother and I submitted some footage for a potential documentary on the Manchester Millyard. And we've never seen it, and we're wondering if you still have it. Well, first of all, you have to remember what was going on in 1968. Redevelopment had started to take hold. Some of the older mill buildings that were no longer being used were starting to be demolished. And the city was undergoing a massive transformation. And indeed, we found paperwork after this email prompt that said, yes, we had actually considered at one point doing a documentary, sort of a before and after, what the Millyard looked like before and after redevelopment. And we had kind of put it out to bid, And this gentleman and his brother spent a couple of days walking through the Millyard, mostly from Granite Street up to about Bridge Street. There's not much that goes up to Elm Street or any of that part of it. And they shot black and white footage. Now, there's no script for those films, and they were never actually put together for the purpose of producing a finished product. They were really audition tapes for the MHA to consider whether or not to continue with the project. Unfortunately, the budget for doing this work was going to be higher than the MHA could afford at that time. In 1968, we had one full-time employee, and she was about to leave on a maternity leave for about 4 months. So we were staffing the place with part-time high school students at that point. So the board of directors at that point said, we can't really take on the project of doing a documentary. The film was sent by the brothers who shot it to developing somewhere, wherever they developed 16 millimeter film, and was mailed directly to the MHA. And it sat there unviewed for the next 50, 60 years. So when we got this email last summer, we went up and started scouting around in our archives on Amherst Street, and sure enough, we found these big metal film canisters, and this was the original product. Hadn't been viewed since September of 1968. In the meantime, we started really looking through our files, and we found another big canister of film. This actually was not film, it was a 2-inch videotape, television production tape. A documentary produced on the Amoskeag in 1978, 10 years after the black and white content. And this was produced by WGBH in Boston. And it kind of makes a nice dovetail to the exhibit that we've had behind me here in the State Theater Gallery since September. This was the history of the Millyard based on the work of Randolph, Langenbach, and Tamara, Hareven. This exhibit's only open for another week. It closes a week from today. So after the films, if you get a chance, please take a look through. These are great still videos of what the Millyard used to look like. Today you're going to see how it looked in moving footage. So what to expect, the black and white films run about 45 minutes total, and then the GBH documentary is about a half hour. Again, realize that the first two, the black and whites, are not in a finished product at all. And in the color footage, you may be surprised how sedate the presentation was. It was typical of television production values in the 1970s, but there's minimal use of background music, not much in the way of flashy graphics. It's pretty low key compared to television that you'd see today. So just setting the stage for expectations. Finally, I'd just like to say thank you to the folks who are on our board of directors who contributed the funding to digitize these so that we could actually see them today. It was one thing to have 16 millimeter film, but we had nothing to view it on. We did finally borrow a projector from St. Anselm College and saw what was there and said, yeah, we've got to do something with this. But the only thing harder to find than a 16 millimeter projector is a 2-inch television videotape machine. So I'd like to thank Patricia Myers, Jeff Murdoch, and Michael Duffy, and myself, all of whom contributed to digitize these products, and they're all here today. So without further ado,
These are the remains of the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in America, the Amoskeag Mills in Manchester, New Hampshire. The introduction of the Industrial Revolution to America can be traced to a stunning feat of memory. In 1810, Francis Cabot Lowell, a wealthy Boston merchant, went to England on a holiday. He was invited to visit the great textile mills in Lancashire, where the English proudly showed him the totally mechanical high-speed looms they had invented for weaving cotton. The design was a closely guarded secret, but Lowell was a merchant, a potential customer, so they let Lowell watch the power looms in operation. He watched and remembered what he saw. When he came home, he promptly hired a talented mechanic by the name of Paul Moody, who, with some innovations, recreated the English loom from Lowell's instructions. Lowell had imported the power loom to America in his head. Along with several other prominent Boston financiers, Lowell planned a development more ambitious than anything ever attempted in America. Whole cities were laid out on rivers that could generate the power to drive mechanical looms. New cities on sites of small villages with giant mills and corporate housing. Within a few years, they had built cotton mills in Waltham, Lowell, Chicopee, Lawrence, Dover, Taunton. And in 1837, he began building the Amoskeag Mills in Manchester, New Hampshire. All these new mills needed now were people to work in them. But in the early 1800s, there was no labor force in this country. So they went to a logical source, the unmarried daughters of Yankee farmers, women whose hand-weaving skills would be replaced by the new power looms. The owners attracted these young women with high wages. Conditions in the mills at first were almost utopian. But the high wages and good working conditions did not last. Overproduction and competition forced the owners to speed up the looms and lower the weavers' wages. The American girls were unhappy with the declining conditions, and many would not tolerate them. They began leaving the mills. But at the same time, immigrants were arriving from Scotland and Ireland, and later from Quebec. Desperate for work and willing to accept lower wages, they went to the mills. By 1920, the mill workers were Scottish, Irish, Polish, Greek, German, and over 40% French-Canadian, and the Amoskeag was the largest textile mill in the world. 15 years later, in 1935, it was bankrupt. This is the story of some of those people who lived and worked in the Amoskeag Mills, told through their words and voices.
I spent my happiest days in the mill. Can you beat that? These buildings must be 100 years old by now. They were just putting up some when I come.
I was brought up in the south of Scotland in a place called Douglas. The town was named after a castle. They all had wars, years and years back. It's all ruins over there. Somebody had to lose.
Thousands of immigrants escaping a poor and downtrodden life, arriving with the hope for a new and better life. For the owners, they were an ideal labor force. They had no alternative. The past was so far away. They were willing to accept conditions for what they were. For a developing nation, this human resource was a welcome gift.
Any education I have, and that's not much, I got in the south of Scotland. They wouldn't have let you stay in school because the people were so poor and they needed your help. My father and my mother were both gone. My mother died shortly after I was born. Then we all scattered around. My brother Tommy and I were the youngest, and we boarded in the south of Scotland, way out of Glasgow. They wanted to put me to work, doing housework.
My Aunt Susan brought my sister and later my older brother to this country. The ones that came to this country never bothered their heads with the ones left on the other side. They were too darn glad to get away from there. I'm telling you the truth. They were so glad to get away that they forgot the kids over in Scotland. But after a while, my sister Susan, she sent for me, and I sent for Tom. My aunt was in the first group that came out of Scotland, all with government help. The Amoskeag sent for her.
Waw saw the cotton spinners, waw saw them gain a waw, Wa saw the cotton spinners sailing down the Brummelaw. Some of them had boots and stockings, some of them had nane at all. Some of them had boots and stockings sailing down the Brummelaw.
My aunt was a weaver over in Scotland. They hired the weavers and the looms, and they both come in the one boat. They brought Scottish looms. That's what my aunt said. She said they come with the looms. A 4-box. It was a 4-box then. Different color in each box. And my aunt knew how to run them, coming from Scotland. When I come here, I made my aunt give up working in the mill. She had enough of the mill.
She was an old lady. She was over 70 years of age. She went way back. She talked a lot about the Civil War. She was here at the time of the Civil War.
We were brought up in the area of the mill. All our people were mill people, and we didn't know anything else but mills. We didn't know anything else existed. It seemed like this was where we would fall in when we got old enough. There was an employment agency. If you continually presented yourself in the morning and at noon and at night, they'd finally get accustomed to seeing you. There was a big line there going in for a job. And when a job popped up and you happened to be the fellow in the line at the time, why, bingo, you got hired. I was very, very fortunate. The Millyard was fenced in. There was a watchman at the gate. You couldn't run out of the building, out into the streets, even if your particular building was situated near the streets, which mine was. As a matter of fact, I did do that a couple of times, and I almost got fired. I was just a kid then.
Each of the mills had their own bell tower, and when the signal came to ring the bell ringers would take a jump on the rope. They pulled down with all their weight. When those bells rang, it was time to go home. That was something to see. 9,000 people trying to get out that gate. That's how it was when people heard those bells. There are still some around. I take walks many times on Sunday afternoons and walk through the places I knew so well and worked for so many years. I certainly do.
It was really my home. When I got up in the morning, I knew where I was going. I was happy. The Millyard was so beautiful. As far as you could look, there were buildings. You had the Chicopee, which was the last mill the Amoskeag built. And the canals were beautiful. They were cut out of stone. Sometimes I wish I'd never seen a mill. That goes along with the supervisors, the pressures. But I had a good life, made a lot of money, and spent a lot of money. But I'd do it all over again.
Many times I'll come here to drive through the Millyard just to see what's going on. Of course, it doesn't look anything like it did when I was here. In those days, there were no automobiles allowed inside the Millyard, except the company cars. There were many places in the yard where you could walk what would correspond to 7 or 8 city blocks and never go outside, through bridges from one mill to the other. So you never had to go out to cross the street, just cross the bridge. You could pretty near walk the length of the Millyard and never go outside. Of course, it was the biggest cloth manufacturing plant in the world at the time.
The Amoskeag ran 11,000 cotton looms at its peak. It employed 14,000 people. They made enough cloth in a year to reach around the world if it was put end to end.
From 1911 to 1921, they employed between 14 and 16,000 workers. And just before the First World War, production of worsted and cotton reached a peak of over 236 million yards a year.
When I first started, all the looms were run by belts. These belts ran from the ceiling to the floor. It was like a forest. It was so dark because of these belts. Every loom had a belt. They always have looms running opposite each other. I've seen floors come away from the walls. Everything is so quiet in here now. Can you imagine what it was like with all of them running? What a noise it would make.
I was scared of the mills. I used to go visit my father. He worked in the spinning room. You couldn't hear yourself talking there. The noise was so loud. I was petrified when I found out I was going to work in the mills. My mother came with me to the office to get a job. We spoke to the man, and she told him that she preferred that I didn't work in one of the places where men and women were working together. She wanted me to go where there were only girls. So I got into the cloth room where it was nice and quiet. It was delightful, really. I was so happy there. I guess it was the relief of not having to go to those horrible mills that I hated so. When I would go to visit my father, I would almost cry.
It seemed like we were locked in when the Amoskeag owned the mill. If you told the boss to go to hell, you might as well move out of the city. The overseer would make a decision to blackball a worker. He had the power that he could blackball you for the rest of your days. The only way you could get a job there again was if you disguised yourself in there. Some of them did that. They would wear glasses, grow a mustache, change their name. It was either that or starve to death. You had to be a good boy, a good person, because that's all you knew, textiles, and the Amoskeag controlled it.
The Straw family were the top powers in the Amoskeag Manufacturing Company. When they would drive down the street, either in their horse-drawn buggy or in their automobile, you would get out of the way. I can remember in the barber shop when the top men would come in, a superintendent in the Amoskeag Manufacturing Company, if all the chairs were occupied in the barber shop, somebody would get up so the fellow could sit down. In other words, his time was more precious to him than my time was to me. People just looked at it that way.
I remember on Elm Street way back, if you saw a loom fixer coming up the street, you tipped your hat to him. You felt that he had made something of himself, that he was somebody.
Every aspect of life in Manchester, economic, political, and social, was dominated by its leading industry, the Amoskeag Mills.
My father came here at 12 years old to work in the mills and live with friends. My mother's father died when she was 8 years old. When she was 16, her mother sent her to Manchester to work. In those days, people didn't have very much schooling. My father and mother went to school for about a year. They depended on the priest to solve a lot of their problems. I remember when I was a little girl, I was petrified when I thought about getting married. All they talked about was having children. The priest used to preach that you had to do what God wanted, and that was what God wanted you to do, to have children. My mother had 12 children. The oldest boys went into the priesthood. Usually they had to go to work, and in fact, my father suffered greatly because of it. Here are these two boys going to school, and my father was working. My father's friends used to say he was crazy. Why are you sending your boys to school? How is that going to help you? All this was very hard on my parents. For us, the only way to get an education was to become a priest or a nun. My mother and father never thought that it was important for a girl to be educated. I remember my father saying, she doesn't have to go to high school, she's going to get married.
My mother, she was working on Amoskeag when she was just only 10-year-old. And my father worked in the locomotive shop at the Amoskeag when he was only 9-year-old. My mother, she don't work more than 1-2 years. She's got sick, and then her mother, she started a boarding house. So she stayed at home to help her mother. And then she got married, and then she's too busy having children. If she don't get so many, maybe she have a chance to go to work some more. I guess we were in the middle class. When we work, we all give our pay to home. And they give us $2 a week. We don't ever think of asking for any more. But on that $2, we pay the Mass on Sunday, and in if you needed stockings or other little things like powder or rouge or lipstick. Oh, no, no lipstick. My father don't let us use lipstick, not even on the day I got married. Told me if I put on lipstick, it don't come to my wedding. Yeah, I'm 6 years old when I start go to school. Some of the kids, they will bring bars of chocolate or orange. I suppose they're more rich than we are, than a big family like ours. My father, he buy a bag of candy, a bag of peanut every payday, and he divide it. He put it on the table and he count it, make all the share even.
I was born in Manchester on Orange Street, but I was raised in Quebec until I was 12. So my father's sister came to visit from Canada and had a big family, and I was 2 years old. I had sore eye. My parents couldn't take care of me. My mother needed money to pay her bill, so my aunt took me to Canada until I was 12 years old. After my parents had 4 new little ones, they wanted me back. It was hard for my mother working in the mill and coming home. Oh my God, I was only a baby when they sent me to Canada. I didn't recognize my parent because I was so young when I left them. I had 2 sisters and 3 brothers. I had 5 children to take care of 6 days a week. In the Amoskeag, we used to work from 6 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock at night, and Saturdays until 4 o'clock. The pay was very small. I'm telling you, I was so lonesome I was talking to myself. I want to go back. I want to go back. If someone said, I can give you something to make you young again, I'd say, oh, no, I don't need that. I'm old and I want to stay old. I came from Canada in 1911. I started working in 1912 when I was 11. And when I retired, I was 72. So I've done my share. We were 13 in my family, 11 children and my mother and father. My mother had 16 children, but 5 died as babies. In Canada, when people had 3 or 4 children that could work, they would come to the United States for a few years to make money and then go back on the farm. Gonna tell you something. In the record of the old Amoskeag, you won't find my name. When I was 11, my father had a birth certificate made. He gave me my sister's name, who died as a baby, because I wouldn't be able to work at 11. You couldn't go in unless you were 13. I first started in the spinning room. My mother was a weaver. They wouldn't take a school kid in the weave room because sometimes the shuttle would fly out, and with those big bells, it was more dangerous. You had to be at least 14 to learn to weave. Either you fit or you don't. I was 13 when my father and mother decided to go back. I didn't want to go back. I begged my mother to leave me. I had my pay every other week. If I go back, I'd have to go work in private houses in Montreal or Quebec. I didn't want that. My mother said, if I can find a good boarding house, I'll let you stay. So she found a boarding house, a family-style boarding house.
The Amoskeag had a textile club. Anybody over 18 who worked there could belong to it. They had a reading room, canteen, billiard and pool tables, card tables, and they used to have dances. They have a golf course with a clubhouse. Members paid $15 a year dues, and outside members paid $35 a month.
Then they had the Amoskeag textile field, which is the baseball field and football field. Everything was taken care of by the Amoskeag. They built the field, they kept it up, and they paid for the help. Any proceeds that were above water would go back to the textile club, and they'd put it in a general fund to operate things like a Christmas party for employees' children. They would take 1,500 to 2,500 children from 5 to 15 free of charge. The overseers would be the ones who would say who would go.
They were often good to the people. The workers were very happy until the strike.
They were trying to repay something, but the wages weren't so high. They were trying to make it easier in one way, make you more satisfied for the small wages that you were making.
The union people came to Manchester, and it was up to us to vote whether we wanted them in or not. Dumaine says grass will grow on Elm Street before the union will come into my mill. I'll close down, he says. I always been fair to my help, and I don't need the union. They have a union in Massachusetts, and they don't do what I do for my help. It was true in a way. All those youngsters didn't know all the benefits the Amoskeag gave us. It was on his account that we had all those things. Nobody else would do that. But the newer generation wanted more money, and they wanted someone to represent them. If an overseer didn't like you, he'd fire you. When you went to the office to get another job, you wouldn't get one, and you wouldn't know why. We needed the union. When we went on strike, we would want it 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, and Dumaine didn't.
At the time of the strike, everyone made enemies. There were those who were for continuing the strike and those who were for continuing to work.
When you have a good job that pays well, you hate to abandon it. I loafed a long time before returning, but we had property, and we were going to lose it if we didn't go to work. Therefore, I went to work, despite the strike, despite the fact that it made enemies. I'll tell them, we're not going to lose our property on account of that strike. As long as they're offering us work, we'll work.
They invented songs to create hatred between the ones who worked and the ones who didn't work.
It was terrible in 1922. I'll never forget it. There was a little store on the corner of Marion and Main, a big building. Someone threw a little piece of lead out. There were maybe 1,500 in the street waiting to catch that little piece of lead. There was no food. People were hungry.
A lot of people kept writing and saying they were despondent. They had no food. They couldn't pay their bills, and they wanted to go to work.
Before that, we had the world knocking on our door for cloth. During the strike, for 9 months, there was no cloth, and they lost their markets. Their customers looked elsewhere for goods, and they found them. The strike accomplished nothing for the Amoskeag. I don't think it accomplished anything for the workers for very long, because the mills closed. In the end, they both lost.
People spent their lifetime savings because there were no unemployment benefits then. They took out every penny they had to live on during that time, and many of them were of an age where they were not hired back again. Archbishop Peterson came from Boston. He had big shares in the Amoskeag, and he came up and gave the people the impression that it was better to have half a loaf than not to have any, coming from a bishop. Of course, he was making millions off the Amoskeag, so the people went back to work.
Then Treasurer Mr. Roush came. He was Dumaine's right-hand man. To look at him, you'd think he was a gangster or something. He'd walk around with one hand in his pocket. He'd go through the room, and if he sees somebody sitting down or somebody talking to somebody else, he'd keep track of it. And he'd go to his boss, and he'd say, I just walked through this room, and I saw about 10 people who weren't even working. Get rid of them. So they put the pressure on, all because of this one man, Mr. Rao. That man was credited with making the Amoskeag a paying proposition, giving people more work. We ran, say, 50 looms. He could fix the job over so they would be 172 looms, 50 to 90 more looms, whatever it was. And before you know it, he cut from 23,000 people down to 10,000 people. That's quite a drop, over 10,000 people. He banished their jobs.
In 1936, the mills went out, and the world stopped for everybody. A lot of our neighbors, a lot of the men committed suicide. There was nothing. There was no food. Everybody had to do everything they could. Women had to work. They had lost their husbands. My father felt terrible at Christmas time. He cried because he couldn't give us what he would have liked to have given us. But he tried very hard doing some gambling. He sold lottery tickets and had his children run the streets for him, delivering. It's a racket, but a man gets desperate to support his family.
So when the mills started to decline, it took the city down with it and gravely distressed the entire community.
The Amoskeag asked for some help from the government. They asked the government to give them a handout because they were in the red. The government appointed Judge Black to find out the story. He found out that the company was salted, so he closed it down. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. All I know is what I read in the paper. I just know that that day everybody came running down the yard saying, "Everybody out."
Judge Black stated, "The truth is they were pulling out their money as fast as they could, and they didn't want to acknowledge it."
I said to my sister, "We'll never go back." The mills never started up again.
I've spent my whole life in the mill. You knew you had a job to do. It was such a good feeling. Now your time has come and you feel lost. You go up and down the aisle and you say, "I used to have all these looms to fill. Now I don't have anything. It is so empty, you can almost hear the stillness come across the room."
Who was responsible for the disastrous decline of the Amoskeag mills? The trustees said again and again that their primary concern was to save the Amoskeag for the people of Manchester. The trustees said, too, that they had an obligation to the owners and stockholders, and so the company was gutted. The profits were taken out, and repair and maintenance of the mills was neglected. In 1935, the mill entered bankruptcy proceedings, and on the basis of court findings, the company was liquidated. For the people of Manchester, the final shutdown and liquidation of the mill destroyed a world and a way of life. This stillness is what was left to them.
It's kind of a depressing ending. And I'm not sure that the depiction that they have in this story is the entire story, whether that's really all the reasons that the mills closed. But it's an interesting depiction. When we got this videotape, when we found it last summer up at our research center, we contacted WGBH to say, how come we have what appears to be one of your master tapes? And it took 4 months before we got a response, and they finally came back to us in January and said, we don't know. So we still don't know the answer to that question, but it's in our collection. They apparently have a copy, or maybe we have a copy of their original. But Bob Perot, I just wanted to follow up with you because I had said at the beginning of that production that those were paid actors, but you're saying that these are the real people you interviewed.
There are 5 people in there that I interviewed. The others I did not. Around 300 people were interviewed for the project. I interviewed about 120 of them. So there were people there that I didn't know. So maybe there were actors in there, but I can tell you right now there were 5 people in there that I interviewed.
Does anybody, including Bob, recall ever seeing this documentary in 1978 when it was produced? It was June of that year. We looked through newspapers, we looked through a lot of media to try to find out when this had been on the air. We had the date that was on the film itself, but we couldn't find anything that definitively said that.
Their archives are not very good for this kind of thing at GBH, because in December, I remember this exactly, December 14th, 1976, aired a film called Soirée Franco-Américaine. It was a French title, but it was made in English, and that was filmed all over New England in Franco-American towns, including Manchester. And people, I was in the film, I was just a kid, like 20-something, and others, and I was trying to find out, like, what happened to that film, and GBH, they don't even have a record of the film.
No answer.
It's crazy.
Well, I can understand how that can happen in an archive. I mean, you have to understand that what we have in our MHA collection, we have thousands and thousands of artifacts. If you count every single newspaper article and every single photograph and clipping and promotional tchotchke from businesses that don't exist anymore, and maps, and when you add up the vast collection, it's literally thousands of things. And the fact that we had the black and white films sitting on a shelf all that time, that was before we had computers. And if there had been any record of them being accessed into our collection, that record had disappeared over time. So I can understand how GBH would have the same problem. And of course, it's been harder for them in the last year since their federal funding was cut. They've got even less people on duty than they did. Well, I don't know if anybody would like to have any discussion on what they've seen today, or any questions that we can try to answer, but that is our presentation. And I think we probably have leftover popcorn, do we not? It's gone? Great. Thank you all for coming. And please enjoy the Langenbach exhibit behind us in the State Theater Gallery, and feel free to take a walk around the museum while you're here. Thank you.